Here we go. This is episode 13 of the Battle of Ohio podcast. The Bengals are getting ready to kick off whatever the opposite of a gauntlet is. Three NFC East teams in their next four matchups, with the Washington football team coming up this week. The Browns, looking much better off than the Bengals are. They're looking to continue putting together what looks like their first playoff run in years. And they got the Eagles this week. And there isn't going to be a whole lot of battling this week because my co-host Thomas he wasn't able to join me for today's episode due to some personal issues. But even without him, I know that the Steelers still suck.
Welcome to the Battle of Ohio podcast, where we follow the revival of the historic rivalry between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Cleveland Browns.
All right, so like I said, it's just me this week. For this episode, I'm sure Thomas will be back for the next episode. But just me. I'm going to do my best at breaking down. I should be fine at breaking down the Bengals matchup. I'm going to do my best to break down the Browns matchup too. As a Bengals Browns podcast, obviously I'm a lot less knowledgeable about the Browns than Thomas is. So I wouldn't be able to do it full justice without him. But I'm going to do my best, and hopefully we can get a good sense of what's to come this week between the Browns and the Philadelphia Eagles. But anyway, the Bengals are coming to a really important get-right stretch, which is super important because a bunch of teams for the last couple years have been using the Bengals as their get-right game. The Bengals kind of, sort of got right against the Jacksonville Jaguars earlier this year, but it didn't really end up amounting to much because the Bengals just went off and got smashed by the Baltimore Ravens, and then we sort of got right against the Tennessee Titans, and then the Bengals went off and got smashed. So the Bengals are kind of entering this stretch right now where it's time to get serious. I mean, it's been time to get serious all year. It's the regular season. You only get 16 games in the NFL, and you got to win every single one. But it's starting to get to the point where, we've won 2 games this year, which already 2.5 games if you count the tie with Philadelphia, which that's already better than last year, in fairness. But the amount of progress we're making so far is really starting to make some fans uncomfortable. And while we did talk on the last episode about how I feel like people are starting to overreact because, we got blown out by the Steelers. Yeah, it sucks. Yeah, it really... anybody who's a Bengals fan knows getting blown out by the Steelers is one of the worst experiences as a fan to watch. It just sucks. But at the same time, I don't know if we like I said the week before, 2 weeks before when we beat the Titans, and then through that week and then through the bye week there was a lot of optimism among Bengals fans, being like, okay, maybe I can see where the team's going with this. Zach Taylor's play calling's been getting better, etc., etc. And then we get blown out by the Steelers, and everybody's suddenly jumping on the let's fire Zach Taylor bandwagon again. And I get it. I do. I was extremely frustrated by the egg that we laid against the Steelers, right? We laid an egg against the Ravens. It's kind of like, the teams that we have to compete with don't appear to be the teams that we can compete with. And yeah, we took the Browns close twice, and the Browns are pretty good this year. But I don't know. It feels like the Ravens and the Steelers are just taking us to town every time we try to play them. And right now, until Cleveland solidifies the fact that they're a contender in the division this year, we have to be able to compete with Baltimore and Pittsburgh. And that is just not something that we're going to overcome playing like that. So essentially what you've got in this next stretch, we've got Washington, New York, Miami's pretty good, Dallas, and then Pittsburgh, and then Houston, and then we finish up with Baltimore. So what you've got really is you've got a bunch of games that you could really consider get right games, because we've been the get right team for like a year and a half. Teams like are like, oh man, we're having such a bad stretch right here. Oh, we got the Bengals up next. It's time to get right against them. And we need to start being the team that starts getting right against bad teams. And well, we got a bunch of bad teams coming up. The Washington football team in particular. But we've got the rest of the NFC East, and like I said, we got those. We got the Houston Texans. Four of the next six opponents, which is the rest of the NFC East and the Houston Texans, all have a combined record of 9-28. I'm pretty sure every single one of those teams, except for the New York Giants, has 2 wins. The Bengals have 2 wins. So it's like we got to start beating these teams if we want to be a competitive team. And a lot of teams play, a lot of great teams play down to their competition. We can't afford to do that right now. We can't afford to be playing down. We got to go on a run right now. And if we don't honestly, if we don't win like 4 of our next 7 games, then there are going to be some big questions to ask. And I mean 4 of the next 7. If we lose to Washington, don't worry, I'm going to be freaking out plenty. But then if we, somehow pull one off against, Pittsburgh, then I think that counts. It's like, if we still end up with 6 wins this year, and one of them didn't come against one of the bad teams, then it's like, okay, I can see we're building something. Maybe next year we can compete to be a playoff team, and once you get in the playoffs with Joe Burrow playing as well as he's shown that he can play this year, then who knows what happens at that point. But I really feel like this week against the Washington football team is a really good matchup for the Bengals. Because where are the 2 areas that the Bengals are struggling the most right now? And it's offensive line and it's defensive line. In particular, it's pass rush and stopping the pass rush. Now, granted, the Bengals' offensive line has been better in recent weeks, but weirdly enough, the Washington football team is almost as bad as the Bengals on offensive line, at least as far as preventing pass rush is concerned. The Bengals have, I believe, the most sacks in the NFL right now, most sacks allowed at 32. And the Washington football team has allowed 30. So they're almost as bad. And the main difference being the Bengals offensive line has kind of started putting a little bit of respectability together the last couple of weeks. I mean, not really enough. I mean, we still let the Steelers get 4 sacks. But the Titans didn't get any. With new guys like Quentin Spain, with Hakeem Adeniji starting to show that he's got something to him. Jonah Williams is going to be coming back. I think Xavier Su'a-Filo is supposed to come back at some point. I don't think he's going to be coming back for this week, but I know he's supposed to be coming back soon at some point. And we're going to start to get to this point where the Bengals have a lot of depth at offensive line, and I still think next year we need to look at putting together the like some better starters on offensive line. But we've got the depth taken care of. We've got guys like Quentin Spain and Hakeem Adeniji and that guy we just brought in from Seattle, who he hasn't even played a snap yet for us. Finney. He hasn't even played a snap yet for us, but we don't really need him to play for us right now. And the fact that he's coming in and he's going to be shoring up some of the depth at a position that we already have a ton of depth at right now is going to be huge. And again, the problem is all we have right now is depth, and Jonah Williams and Trey Hopkins, and other than that, we're not doing so great in the starting department. But it's you can see it's starting to turn around, and the Washington pass rush is actually one of the better pass rushes in the NFL. They got 28 sacks right now, and that's good for, I believe, 5th best in the NFL. So it's definitely going to be a test to see where the Bengals' offensive line is right now. But the Bengals have put together a lot more solid performances on offensive line, and it's weird for me to be saying that the offensive line and defensive line is a good matchup, but I mean, part of that has to do with the fact that you got Chase Young on the other side, who came in with all this lauding, all these accolades, all these oh, he's like the best prospect of all time, and to be completely honest, that guy only has like 3.5 sacks on the year. Yeah, he's got 1, 2, 3, 4. He's got 4 quarterback hits, which I guess would be 3. Pretty much the only time he's hitting the quarterback is when he sacks him and brings him down, which I guess that's a testament to his follow through. But at the same time, this is not a guy who's putting together this world class performance or anything. A lot of Bengals fans were saying, oh well, you're going to be seeing that out of Chase Young, so maybe we should get him instead of Joe Burrow and start building this team before we plug the quarterback in. But I haven't seen it out of Chase Young this year. There's some flashes here and there for sure, but there's a lot of him taking time off and not getting where he needs to be, which was one of my biggest criticisms of Chase Young coming out of the draft. Actually, was that I feel like he takes too many, not just plays off, but he takes too many games off, and you're not seeing the kind of dominance and production out of Chase Young that you really that everybody was, I think, expecting. I think a lot of people were expecting Chase Young to come out and be Defensive Player of the Year and just absolutely dominate. You're just not seeing that. So, without that fresh young injection of talent, I could see this rebuilt Bengals offensive line having a pretty good game against a pretty good Washington pass rush. On the flip side of that, you've got a Washington offensive line that, like I said earlier, has allowed 30 sacks on the season, and especially with a guy behind center like Alex Smith, who, I mean, honestly, I cringe when I see that guy drop back with how bad that Washington offensive line is. I can only imagine how his family feels watching that happen, or how, the Washington coaches feel, who are kind of pretty much on their last quarterback option at this point. But like I said, like me, I see that and I cringe. I'm like, oh my god, that guy just came back from almost dying from a leg injury. This is nail biting. This is gut wrenching to watch him go through this. But to be completely honest, as far as the matchup is considered, that bodes well for the Bengals, because one area they're really, 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 really struggling in is a pass rush. I mean, you got Carl Lawson, but you don't have anybody else. We don't even have Tat McKinley now because he failed his physical, or whatever it was. I think it was a physical that he failed, but whatever it was, he failed it, and he's not on the team now. So we just have to deal with that. And we're back to Carl Lawson being our only viable pass rushing option. But luckily, we draw a really bad Washington offensive line, and at that point, I think you're going to be able to pressure Alex Smith into trying to make faster decisions, faster whatever, and potentially lead to some mistakes, and that's going to really help with our secondary that really struggled against the Steelers' really strong wide receiver unit. And there's actually another great matchup, because Washington does not have a great unit like that. They got Terry McLaurin, and at least as far as top options, that's about it. He's a speedster, he's a burner, but the way I see it, if you just put William Jackson on him, and then have Jesse Bates over there just kind of spying, make sure he doesn't try anything funny over the top, then you can basically just shut down Terry McLaurin, and then you're forcing Alex Smith to make quick, rapid, hasty decisions against bad options. Now, the biggest thing that from a matchup perspective is not going to go in the Bengals' favor is I think from a game plan perspective, or at least the way that the game's going to go, because you've got this Washington team that has a habit of not finishing off comebacks, but like we saw against Detroit last week. It looked like Detroit was dominating that game, and then Alex Smith led them in a huge comeback to bring that game back down to the wire. You're watching that game, and before you know it, Detroit has gotten out to this incredibly hot start. They have a great first half, and they even to their first drive in the second or in the third quarter, they're still looking like they're dominating. They get up to a 24-3 lead, and then just somehow out of nowhere, they just, like the Bengals have so many times this year, they just seem like they have stopped remembering how to play football, and they end up having to sweat one out and get lucky that their kicker Matt Prater is not Randy Bullock. So, like I said, from a game plan perspective, at that point you have the problem of relying on the Bengals to potentially jump out to this huge lead, which is something we know they can start hot, but holding on to it can be a problem, and this Washington football team is not a stranger to big comebacks. So the Bengals, if they do get out hot, they're going to have to rely on holding this lead, because you really don't want it to come down to a situation like the Lions had in Detroit, because the Lions had Matt Prater on their side. And while Matt Prater may not be, the most accurate kicker of all time in the history of ever, he is one of the strongest kickers in the league. And he nailed a 59-yarder at the end of regulation to give the Lions a 30-27 victory. I don't trust Randy Bullock to nail a 59-yarder in the clutch at the end of regulation. Now, that's not to say he hasn't made some long field goals in the clutch before, but I mean, just look at this year just for example. They're like probably 2 or 3 wins. Well, we could potentially, at the very least, have 2 or 3 more wins this year if Randy Bullock was able to hit field goals that he needed to in clutch situations. Now, again, I'm not going to say that we definitely lost those games because of Randy Bullock. Although I am saying that there were, I believe it was the Chargers game where we at the very least didn't go to overtime because of Randy Bullock. Like, that was definitely Randy Bullock at the very end. I believe he even made the field goal, and then it got called back from a penalty, or there was a timeout or something, and then he tried it again and he missed it. And it's just like, I hate you. I hate you so much, Randy Bullock. You're the worst. But, that's just life as a Bengals fan. But anyway, point being that is, from a matchup perspective, I think the Bengals have really good matchups against the Washington football team. The only thing that bothers me really is I don't even know if you would call it a matchup, but the potential of the Bengals getting out to this hot start and then just kind of randomly forgetting how to play football, and then Washington coming back with this huge, amazing, momentous comeback win. Because I wouldn't put it past the Bengals. But, we'll see what happens with the Bengals, because, it's you never know what you're going to get out of them from week to week, and that's part of, I think, what people are frustrated with, because it's partially not knowing what you're getting out of them week to week, and in addition to that, it's the losing. So it just kind of feels like we're just waiting to figure out how they're going to figure out a way to lose this week. But with a win this week and starting off on a run, I think you can start to turn those the emotions of the Bengals fan base back to a positive feeling, to where at the end of this season people are like, okay, you know what, this year was at least better than last year. Let's give Zach the benefit of the doubt. There's been some good draft picks here. There have been some good player development on certain aspects, maybe not so much on other aspects. It's all about instilling confidence, and you're gonna need a run at the end of this year against these bad teams to do it. Speaking of bad teams, the Browns go up against the Eagles this week, and it breaks my heart that Thomas is not here to talk trash about Carson Wentz, because we know right now he would be saying, Carson Wentz, you're trash. And that is because Carson Wentz is trash. He is a big old trash can. Part of what makes Carson Wentz trash, though, is just the fact that his team around him is so erratic and chaotic. And honestly, that bodes really well for the Browns this week. Because, I mean, as we saw last week, the Browns can grind you down with their running game. You know, they got Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt there in the backfield. And those two by themselves, it's just like, you know, if the Browns can get going in a successful way on the running game, then they can control the game as much as they want to. But, you know, in addition to that, when the Eagles are on offense, they're going to have to deal with Myles Garrett screaming around the corner, disrupting the game like he does every week, and making Carson Wentz fear for his life. And that is a horrible, 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 horrible thing for an Eagles team that is the worst pass blocking team in the NFL with 35 sacks. Be completely honest with you, I don't blame Carson Wentz. I mean, I do, but I also kind of don't blame Carson Wentz for being as trash as he is this year, because he's just not getting any help. This Eagles offensive line is a disaster with pass rushing. Like, I mean, I feel like I've been saying that about both the Bengals and the Browns opponents this week. And as a Bengals fan, I'm always looking at this awful Bengals offensive line. But there are other bad offensive lines in the NFL, and the Eagles offensive line appears to be worse. Actually, I think the Washington offensive line might currently be worse than the Bengals' current offensive line. But the point is, this Eagles offensive line is a disaster. Like I said, they're the worst pass blocking team in the NFL, and that is going to bode extremely well for Myles Garrett and that Browns pass rush. And in addition to that, I mentioned earlier that the Browns controlling this game on the ground is going to be, you know, a really good strategy for them to go for, and it's partly because it's partly because of Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, but it's also partly because the Eagles are absolutely awful at stopping the run. They're a bottom 10 run defense. They've allowed the third most rushing touchdowns in the NFL with 14. If the Browns just hand off, like, I mean, you don't even have to worry about how erratic Baker Mayfield looks sometimes. Just hand the ball off to Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, and they're going to carry you to a win this week. The Eagles are not a very good football team, and you know the Browns have the opportunity to really build on their playoff aspirations this week. Especially with the Ravens going up against a potentially tough Tennessee Titans offense. And I said offense for a reason, because that defense is something else. But yeah, like I said, the Browns have a great matchup this week, and I would be kind of. I know this isn't the prediction segment. But I would be kind of shocked this week if they didn't pull off the win against this Eagles team. And if they don't beat this Eagles team, then I think you start seeing not so much the same kind of questions that the Bengals fans have about, you know, Zach Taylor and, you know, the current regime, and, you know, are they teaching, or are they putting Joe Burrow in the best situation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you're going to start seeing, you know, the beginnings of questions about, like, you know, oh, is this just the same old Browns? Oh, is Baker Mayfield really the guy to lead this Browns team? Which you've already seen questions like that. But if they lose to the Eagles, you're really going to start seeing questions like that. And the reason for that is the Browns should absolutely be able to handle business against the Eagles. No question. We recently moved the NFL predictions segment to an entirely different episode. We're producing that separately from the podcast now, just because it was taking up so much time on the podcast that and people were liking it enough that it just kind of felt like, you know, let's just move it to its own thing. That way the podcast can stand on its own, and the varying segments that we do on the podcast can get all the time that they need, and we don't have to, like, crunch everything down and try to, like, just rush everything out, because we know that this prediction segment is going to take up way too much time. So we just kind of gave that its own thing. And I'm recording this as of Thursday night. So the Seahawks and the Eagles are actually playing right now, and I can get that game back up. Looks like they're on commercial. Well, then I'll go check on ESPN. Looks like right now the Seattle Seahawks are beating the Arizona Cardinals. So I just see if I can bring this up. See if you guys can see this. Well, you know what? Never mind. I'll screenshot it and take a picture later. But before this game, Thomas sent me his pick for this game. So before the game started, he sent me his pick for the Seattle Seahawks to win this game, and I picked the Arizona Cardinals to win this game. Right now, the Seahawks are winning, so if that result holds, then he's going to be right and I'm going to be wrong. But just so you know, that was definitely picked. The picks are going to come out way after the game's long over, but we actually did make the picks before the game was played. So when y'all listen to this, you can laugh at either me or Thomas, because by then you're going to know the result of the game. But I just wanted to make sure that it was out there that was made before the game was picked. So if you see the predictions episode later this week and you see me counting the Seattle Seahawks or the Arizona Cardinals for either of us, know that that wasn't just like a lame thing that we did. We just pulled out of our ass after the game, like, oh, we forgot to do this. Now we gotta pretend like we did it. No, we did do it. It was at the last second, but we did do it. Yeah. Let's go ahead and get into the state of the AFC North now. The Baltimore Ravens going up against the Tennessee Titans. And this one could actually be a really key game, not just for the Baltimore Ravens, but for you Cleveland Browns fans out there. Because if the Ravens can't get their offense going against this Titans defense, then that shows some real problems, because this Titans defense is not good. And me and Thomas have talked before, the past couple episodes on this podcast, about how the Ravens' offense is really looking really suspect. It's looking like the NFL may have figured them out and figured out how to beat them. And if the Titans can figure out how to stop this Ravens offense, then you're really looking at some big questions. And you're actually looking at some questions about if the Ravens are even a playoff team, which I know sounds crazy to say, but look at it this way: if the Browns, if the Browns beat the Eagles and the Ravens lose to the Titans, then the Browns are 7-3 with that number 5 playoff seed, and the Ravens fall to 6-4. And I don't believe, even if the Colts lose to the Packers, and let's say the Dolphins, so if the Dolphins lose to the Broncos, then the Ravens would be back in control of the playoff seed, but the Dolphins are not going to lose to the Broncos. So there is a real path this week to the Baltimore Ravens no longer being a playoff team if they do in fact lose to the Tennessee Titans. The Steelers, I can't imagine they're going to stay undefeated all year with the way that they've been playing. But I also say that as a Bengals fan who thought that the Bengals had a chance to put up a good game against them, and they absolutely did not. But I will say that they draw the Jaguars this week, and the Jaguars are not a good team. They're just not. But the Jaguars are scrappy, and they have played good in certain circumstances this week, or this year. They've played good in certain situations this year. Like just last week, the Jaguars took the Packers down to the wire. One play goes one way, one play goes another way, and the Jaguars may have knocked off the Green Bay Packers last week. And you cannot tell me that the Packers are a significantly worse team than the Steelers. You can maybe argue that the Steelers haven't lost any games, so how could they possibly be worse than the Packers? And whatever. The Packers have 2 losses, I believe, so far. So, at that point, you even get rid of the potential mulligan argument. but they're not that much better than the Packers. Like I said, the Jaguars are scrappy. James Robinson is a great running back. He's looking like he's developing into a great running back. When that Jaguars passing offense actually clicks, then they can do some stuff. That defense is starting to come into its own. Depending on the game, depending on the situation, the defense has a tendency to sometimes come into their own. And I'm not saying they're going to beat the Steelers. In fact, when we do the prediction segment later, I can't imagine I'm going to pick the Jaguars to beat the Steelers. But I am saying don't be shocked if the Jaguars give them a game. As far as the state of the division race in the AFC North, there's not much that can really happen here. Like, let's say the Ravens do beat the Titans and the Jaguars do beat the Steelers. Even then, the Ravens are still like 2 games behind the Steelers. So, I mean, this division is definitely not like wrapped up, but it's starting to it's starting to look like there's not really a whole lot else to be done here. And then obviously the Bengals are non-contenders. I mean there is still a mathematical path for them to get to the playoffs, but come on, let's not be ridiculous here. There's really no need to talk about the Bengals in terms of the state of the AFC North, except for on those weeks, the 2 remaining weeks where the Bengals do play AFC North teams. Then the Bengals would come into the discussion, but other than that, I'm sorry, Bengals fans, but we don't really matter right now. We don't, and you know it. At least as far as the AFC North is considered in 2020, nobody cares about what the Bengals are doing right now. It's just a fact of the matter. But anyway, I think that is going to do it for this episode of the Battle of Ohio podcast. Hopefully, Thomas will be able to make it back for the next episode, and I won't have to make an attempt to pretend like I know half of what I'm talking about when it comes to the Browns. I mean, I know the Browns. I know football decently well, but I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm some Browns guru or anything. So hopefully I did a good enough job for you guys to get you through the week. But anyway, you can find the podcast on the Battle of Ohio podcast on YouTube. That's pretty much exclusively where it's at right now. Hoping to turn it to an audio-only podcast on like Spotify and Apple podcasts and all that good stuff in the future, but we haven't gotten quite there yet. But if you do like the podcast and you want to help it grow, it helps to just tell people about it. But I mean, if you don't want to do that, you can just like and subscribe on YouTube. And you subscribe, you'll know when new episodes are coming out, and it would make us look better to the YouTube algorithm, and that's how more people find this podcast. You can find me at Kyle Phelps 92 on Twitter and Facebook.com/The Phelps. That's pretty much where I do most of my interacting. I do have an Instagram, but I don't really use it. You can find Thomas at T_star94 on Twitter and Instagram. I think it's the same thing. And then on his YouTube page, Blowdown page, he does like comedy videos and stuff like that. So, yeah, thanks for listening, everybody, and hooday. Thomas would say go Browns, but I would not agree with that.